Hello, Poe. It's good to see you out, fella. Yeah. Oh, look. We have visitors. Let's put you over here. And let's welcome them to tonight's show. Excuse me. Hello, friends. Welcome. Welcome back to W.R. Frady's Live Ghost Stories by the Fireside. I'd like to make a quick disclaimer. This week's episode has been pre-recorded, primarily because I'm not going to be in town to do the live version of the stories this week. And this may happen from time to time. But I promised you ghost stories each Friday from September through October and Halloween. And ghost stories you'll get. I'd like to make a few announcements. If you haven't checked it out already, please go and check out the Ebonstone That's the home for all things W.R. Frady. There's still work being done to it, but it is up, live, and running. There you'll get to see Whispery Hollow, the fantasy with Lovelady Township, and Catawba Valley. You will also see Darkhaven Manor, home of the vampire killer, along with the Wise Oak, Wolf Moon Studios, and many, many other oddities. And be sure to keep checking in on the Cantankerous Cauldron, for you never know what might pop in there that might be in the works. That's the EbonstoneTower.com. Also, stay tuned for Papa Stroh's Sinister Cinema. Who knows when that might be coming out, but I do know it's coming soon. Excuse me. Another thing I'd like to announce. The Vampire Killer. Let's back that up. The Legends of Lacey Road, Volume 1. Is still in the works. I've had to bump it back a little ways. If you've heard any of my announcements and us talk about it on the Coach Mickey, Mel, and Friends podcast, then you'll know that I projected and hoped to have it ready for the Halloween season. Life has a tendency to get in the way, and in that, there has been some preempted delays that will have inevitably set it back. But rather than rush and just give you something I'm not happy putting my name on, I want to give you quality stories that you can enjoy time and time again. Even if they are true ghost stories, still, I want to be able to, for you to be able to enjoy them. These, along with the tales from Whispery Hollow, are my scary stories to tell in the dark. The Legends of Lacey Road being live, the tales for the Fireside being the original ghost stories, and then Whispery Hollow being the fantasy gothic horror Catawba Valley, which I have been creating over the last nearly a decade now. That being said, I would like to thank you all for joining me again. I am glad to see you up by the fireside with me. So, pull up a chair. Grab a hot cider, a hot drink, tea, coffee, whatever you'd like to refresh yourself with as we dive into these stories. Turn the lights down low. Get comfortable. And without further ado, let's begin. Tonight, are things in the darkness. The unquiet, restless dead. Have you ever sat around a fire like we're doing now and told tales or heard tales of people seeing things after dark that wouldn't normally be found? Strange shadows in the darkness. Maybe you've went to an old church and saw a figure moving across the graveyard and at first dismissed it as a random passerby, only to find that there was no one there to begin with. Or perhaps you've been in the woods and hear things walking beyond the light of your campfire that you hope is just animals. But then what animal would come closer to a fire and skulk around the outside of the light, just beyond the extension of where the light can shine? Just beyond the radius of the light, the borders of the light and the shadow. We all have heard tales. We all have experienced some things that we can't explain. And that's what makes these tales all the more fun. Here at W.R. Frady's Fireside, we will tell tales from the Legends of Lacey Road, the Fireside Tales, my original ghost stories, Whispery Hollow, and the Lovelady Township, as well as folklore and sometimes some of our favorite authors, from Edgar Allan Poe to the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark to H.P. Lovecraft. Who knows what tales might arise from the fireside. Now, I say this simply because tonight's story, the first story, comes from the town of Lovelady in the fantasy Cassava Valley of Whispery Hollow in the Lovelady Township. It is quite possibly, actually, it's not quite possibly, it very much is the oldest Lovelady story in the collection. And I like to call it The Long Walk Home. "Rummy," Sarah said as she put down the cards, showing that she had won this particular round. The girls giggled. They had spent the entire day laughing, talking about things around the neighborhood, the boys they like, and so forth, just as girls do. Chatting the latest gossip. And they continued on. And as I was shuffling the deck, getting ready to dish out another oh boy, can't think of the word right now, dealing out another hand, Becky's mom come to the door. "Hey girls, your dad and I are going to bed, and so you might want to keep it down and not be so loud out tonight." Sarah looked up. What time is it?" She's, it's getting close to midnight. It's probably around 11:30. The blood drained from Sarah's face. "Oh, no. I was supposed to have been home hours ago. I've got to go. I'm sorry, Becky. I've got to go. It's okay. Just get home safely. So with that, they said their goodbyes. And she thanked Becky's mom for not only letting her know the time, but for the hospitality of that evening. She grabbed her jacket, her coat, and ran out the door. Excuse me. The streets were as silent as the grave. An oppressive air had fallen over the land like the low hanging fog which caressed the ground. Sarah hurried down the street, her footsteps echoing off of the houses and into the night, as if trying to keep her company as she went. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and she looked up, not thinking of anything, just, I'm in so much trouble, she thought. I'm in so much trouble. I've got to get home, What's the fastest way? And her mind was racing as she was going down the road. She passed several streets, several houses, and she knew that the only and the quickest way she could get home was down old Shadow Birch Drive. Shadow Birch Drive, though. How many of her friends, how many of her family and things always warned, don't ever take the old cemetery road after dark. But it was a dire need, man. She needed to get home. So on she went. Do I take it? Do I take it? Do I take it? And she looked up, and the sign, along with the wrought iron gate, loomed above her. The wind just cut across cut across through the trees, hissing as it ran through the branches, as if to announce that she had come upon that forbidden border. Shadow Birch Cemetery that was an old cemetery, perhaps older than the town itself, but no one really knew, at least no one that she had ever mentioned, no one that she'd ever talked to. And she thought, and as she considered, weighed out the options of which way she should go, her feet had already made the decision for her as she was plodding along the old cobblestone path and the road that was Shadow Birch Drive. Now, being an old, seemingly ancient graveyard or cemetery, the road was lined with hedges, and above those hedges, great hulking beasts of old oaks and maples reached out and almost made a mild canopy over the road. Here and there, the moonlight would shine. So Sarah was literally fumbling along in the dark. She didn't have a candle or a lantern to light the way, but just trusted in her feet and the faint strokes of moonlight which had penetrated the trees and made their way to the road below. As she traveled, she heard the whispers of things in the darkness just beyond sight. Perhaps it was people or things in the graveyard, or perhaps it was the wood, perhaps it was the wind, just whispering through the trees. She heard something move. And yet, when she stopped, so did the sound that had accompanied her since the leaving of Becky's house, which was the sound of her own footsteps. When she started up again, her footsteps sounded loud and heavy and almost as if it was shouting into the night. Somewhere in the distance, a wild dog barked, and it was far. Matter of fact, she realized that the insects that might have been chirping to announce the cooler weather seemed so far away. There were times when she couldn't even see her hand in front of her face as she continued to plod down the cobblestone road of Shadowbirch Road. After what seemed like forever, the trees opened up and she came to a clearing. And she was relieved to have the moonlight lighting the way once more. She noticed up ahead, just as the road made a turn, veering off to the right around a particularly gnarled oak. At least what she could tell, but she could tell its rheumatic form as it was just contorted over the road. Even if it was but a silhouette, she saw what appeared to be someone walking up ahead. At first she was caught unaware and kind of taken aback, because who else would be out at this time of night? But the more she got, the closer she seemed to get, the more that she could make out it looked like it was possibly another girl like her. And in fact, as she drew closer, it was. So, she got closer, and the girl saw her coming and slowed her pace to allow Sarah to catch up. Sarah said, I'm thankful that there's at least someone to walk along with tonight. Do you mind if I accompany you? I'm trying to get home. The girl looked up, simply smiled. I said, of course, in a voice that seemed to come and go as the wind. And I walk this road all the time. You're welcome to join me. So, being relieved, Sarah took up the journey with her newfound walking companion. The girl introduced herself as Emily. And the two talked and just, it relieved Sarah. And the road seemed to take a little bit farther. The trees closed back in around them. The shadows enveloped them, and they continued to walk and talk. Here and there were rustlings and the sounds of things running and moving and whispers off the side of the road, but perhaps it was just the wind, as she had heard before. Minutes passed, and finally they came to the end of Shadowbirch Drive and the long cemetery road. Emily had told Sarah that she would accompany her home to ensure that she got there safely. So Sarah began walking up the road that would lead to her home. Emily right alongside her. And at this point, Emily had grown just slightly quiet, but continued to talk, but continued to be, responsive. They went down the road. It was up a hill, turned off to the left, and soon Sarah's house, or at least the silhouette of Sarah's house, and a fairly dimly lit window came into view. And as the two entered Sarah's yard, old Patches, Sarah's dog, come running up to greet them. But as soon as it got within too close, it kind of stopped. And Patches looked for a minute, cocked his head, and dropped his tail, and then turned and ran back to the house. Rather unusual for Patches. Patches was usually very friendly, and it was very rare for him to shy away from someone. And so, Sarah apologized to Emily. I'm sorry, he's not usually like this. He's usually very friendly. And Emily just kind of giggled. It's okay. No worries, she said. So the two continued, and they got up to the porch. And Sarah turned and looked at Emily and says, Emily, thank you. I'm glad that you walked with me the rest of the way. Shadowburst Road is just a really scary place, and especially after dark, and I was kind of frightened to walk down through there by myself. And I'm glad you joined me and kept me company. Emily just smiled and giggled. She said, "It's okay. It's okay. You're most welcome. I know how it feels. I used to feel the same way too when I was alive." And with that, Emily smiled and faded from existence. So, a companion in the dark. That wasn't all that she seemed. Interesting, How many times is it possible that you may have encountered similar, without even knowing it, without even the announcement? Think about you being somewhere off by yourself, have someone who joins you and keeps you company, and then when you turn around to thank them, they're no longer there, they're no longer in sight, no one ever recalls them being there. It's food for thought. But then again, it is the town of Lovelady. And the town of Lovelady and the town of Whispery Hollow, well, they're an old place with old restless spirits. But they do welcome you to come stay once in a while. I hope you enjoyed the tale of The Long Walk Home. It has been written many, many times over, and I'm due to revise it one last time and put it in its definitive setting. So that's something to be looking forward to in the near future. And take a moment, get a sip of my water. All right. Let's take a turn to the scary stories, where another incident with the Restless Dead took place by the title of the story the window. Margaret and her brothers Paul and Robert stayed in a small cottage at the top of the hill. And while Margaret stayed in one room with a nice big window that looked over the countryside below, her brother stayed in a room just across the hallway. Well, one night, when Margaret was getting ready for bed, she noticed some odd movement at the bottom of the hill, near where the old cemetery was. She watched, and she followed, and she saw an eerie greenish light, like pinpricks of light, move up from the graveyard and into the woods. And she followed it for a little while until it went out of view. And she kind of stared for a few minutes, and she'd lost track of it. And then, a few minutes later, they came back into view. Except, no longer were they down the hill, but they were at the edge of the woods, just beyond the border of her yard. And as it come closer into the moonlight, it was moving toward the house. And it looked like a man, sort of, except it was gaunt and kind of shambling, acting, just wasn't acting right. Something about it unnerved her. So she turned away to try to get her mind off of it, and was getting her bed ready. And when she went to turn around, and the next thing she knew, she turned to look back out the window to see if the thing was in view, and only to find herself staring face to face with a tall, gaunt form of a man with shrunken in cheekbones and sunken in eyes and eerie greenish pinpricks of light coming were back in the base of the eyes. And it was staring right at her. And she wanted to scream at first, but it was caught in her throat. And in the moment it took for her to get her breath back to do so, the thing had busted into the window and pulled open the window pane itself, and had reached in and grabbed her, and had come in and proceeded to bite down on her throat. And at that moment, her fear had let go, and she screamed as the pressure of the teeth biting down on her just had jerked her out of that fear-like paralysis. And her brothers come dashing into the room to find Margaret laying on the floor, bleeding, while the thing was hovered over top of her. And it looked up at them and then busted back through the window, and they took off running after it and chased it and lost sight of it in the woods. Until they had followed it to where they could tell it was going toward the old graveyard. But they got back, and they were trying to stop the bleeding on her throat. And so they patched the window. They took Margaret into the room with them and to keep her safe and fix the blood. And the next day they fixed the window, and the oldest of the brothers went into town. Paul bought a gun so that he could, if that thing come back, or the man or whatever it was come back, he would shoot it to keep it from attacking his sister again. And At first, all seemed well, and Margaret was like, "Perhaps we won't see it again. That he won't ever come back. You guys chased it off, but you gave him a good scare. He knows I'm not alone now, and he won't." So the window got fixed, and days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months, and then one day, as the season was turning, Margaret was getting ready for bed, and as she turned around, she found herself staring into the pallid, sunken features of the thing that had attacked her earlier that year. This time, however, she screamed early enough to get her brother's attention, and they rushed into the room before the thing could come in and ran out the door, chasing the creature thing down into the woods and down in, and he shot at the creature, hitting it in the leg, and it howled and continued on into it howled with pain and hit and continued on in to where the graveyard was, where they lost sight of it. So the next morning, they went to the church and told the sexton what the events of what had happened and what was going on and where they had chased it. And so the sexton followed them out to the graveyard and opened it up. And when they went inside, they noticed that bodies and caskets and remains had been tossed about, and the place looked like it had been completely ransacked. The smell of decay and death just permeated the air. But as they went through the rooms, they found one coffin that had not been disturbed. And as they went and removed the lid, there inside lay the thing that had attacked their sister twice already. The bullet still lodged in its leg. So, the sexton went outside, built a pyre, a hot, blazing pyre, and as would be tradition to rid that town of one of the undead, they filled the mouth with bulbs of garlic and then tied its mouth shut to keep it from being able to spit it out. And they lifted the corpse and took it outside and fed the molten remains to the flames and watched as the whole thing burned until naught was left but ash. And thus they had gotten rid of the vampire that had attacked their sister and rescued the town from a fate far worse than what was known to be going on. I thank you for listening to these two stories tonight. I regret deeply that I'm not able to do this live this time around. I would love to have seen you come on and enjoy the ghost stories. But I will be back on live next Friday for W.R. Frady's live ghost stories by the Fireside. We've still got a month and a half till Halloween, and ghost stories for each Friday night. And stay tuned. I may have some visitors coming in. Who knows who's going to be a guest on W.R. Frady's live ghost stories by the Fireside. I know that whoever it is, it'll be a lot of fun. Don't forget to check out the Ebonstone Tower, the ebonstonetower.com. And be sure to watch The Devil's Daughter, as well as the Dusk series. Enjoy your cider, your tea, whatever it is you might be drinking. Cheers. And I want to wish you, each and every one, a wonderful and safe weekend. May your tales be as exciting and adventurous as the ones to come, or more so. Life's got to be interesting. I'll see you in the shadows again soon. Until then, this is W.R. Frady, welcoming you once again, and thanking you for joining me by the fireside. See you in the shadows.